Hey, everybody. Hey, welcome to week 116. And we are going to be talking about recession proofing your business. And Adam has a bunch of good stuff. I'm sure Jack does too. Jack has the appropriate background that is thematic. You'll get to see that when he talks. I'm wearing the Pair PEO shirt because that happens to be one of the possible ways of actually saving some money. We're actually exploring that option now, which if you don't know what a PEO is or does, check it out. But bottom line is you can possibly save money on your health insurance, depending on the size of your company, outsource some HR functions that are more kind of compliance oriented, et cetera. It's not for everybody, but I told Jeff, he's helping us. I will wear his t-shirt today. So this is a plug for Jeff Warner and Pair PEO. All right, so let's dive into it. I know we got a hard stop at noon. So anybody having any questions that we aren't addressing in this theme today, let us know on the Q&A. You can harass us in the chat. So before we launch into this, because we've got a document, we've actually got a recession-proof checklist that we can make available to you after this thing is done. We've got it in a PDF as well that I think is quite good. So here's a hard copy of it, and we have a digital copy that we will put up on the screen when Adam goes into his diatribe. So, but before we do that, Jack, since you do have that really cool thematic background, anything that you want to talk about?
I guess just a couple of general updates on just things other than what we're going to talk about today as at its core. So a couple of recent events, the Department of Labor, and I mentioned this maybe last week or in a couple of weeks prior, is looking into the whole employee versus independent contractor and trying to come up with a federal rule. There is resistance to that, but it was announced that they're going to start a rulemaking process regarding the worker classification. So probably more to come on that, but it would be very interesting. And because those of us who deal with this in this area know there are varying standards depending on what you're talking about, independent contractor versus employee is, whether it is an IRS classification, which is Department of Labor, all those things. So also, we had talked about unionization of workers, and recently the Apple Store in Baltimore, in a Baltimore suburb, voted 2-1 to join or to organize. And there was a place in Maryland that also voted to join an international association. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that happening. There's been traditionally thoughts that unionization apply to like auto workers and other in specific geographies within metropolitan areas and those kind of things. And so the reason why I said the word suburb, I mean, this is sprawling out into us ordinary folk, I guess, in outside of super urban cities. Interestingly, in a case in, I think this was also in Maryland, discounts for minority interest and lack of marketability were upheld. There are all throughout the country, whether in a federal court or a state court, there are various standards whether or not a discount in for selling a minority interest that is valid, as well as there's lack of marketability. It's not openly traded. So should there be discounts related to that? And the thing in this case is, and I think that it's widely accepted, but also widely rejected. It depends on the circumstances. In this case, the other side didn't come up with a legitimate alternative valuation. So the court held. So this is really a particular case, particular set of facts for this case. And then, I like my statistics. So this is, the title of this was More Business Owners Deciding to Sell, Most Retiring, and the statistics. And this is a report from Biz Buy Sell. And they surveyed owners, and they said over 63% say they are over 50 years old, and 30% say they are over 60. More than a third, 37%, say they plan to sell within 2 years. And then of the surveyed people, the majority, 55%, cite retirement as their motivation for selling, while a substantial 31% say their business is doing well and they feel they can currently receive a good price. Active for sale inventory of businesses has climbed 10% over the past year, the report says. So, and that goes in kind of the same category as people being bottled up for the past 2 years or so. And there was an interesting article that Gary shared with us about businesses and lending practices, and that also goes into the leasing world. I have landlords and lenders busting down my virtual door to get things done, and like, where are we on this? Where are we in this? And it's like, I just got the red line yesterday, so give me a chance to get through it and to give you a valid response and a meaningful response, rather than just basically throwing stuff back at you, but having some substantive conversation as to why we feel a certain way on a certain provision. So kind of that is the state of the union with respect to current events in the business world.
Well, Adam, you will be happy to know that a lot of the stuff on your checklist is completely validated by my former business partner, Jim Holder, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was at a company called Business Finance and Development that we bought. And so he's in the M&A world, and that's the article that you're referencing, but he talks about balance sheets. So, hey, you want to talk about balance sheets, or you got something else before that?
Yeah, the only, since Jack went into all things socialism, regarding, just kidding. Remember, I'm a libertarian, so I'm, I'm equal across the board. That I think Jack hit on the employee versus independent contractor. I mean, even before that, we haven't really hit on it. But this would be, kind of related to transaction, diligence that we've talked about in the last weeks, but also just kind of as a CYA, because, something happened with one of our clients, even though we warned them that they were doing it wrong and they needed to fix it. And, they didn't. And then this is what happened, is that, even if you get past the independent contractor versus employee side of the equation, there's also a question of, do you have an exempt versus non-exempt position? Which really, has a couple different components, but really boils down to, do I need to be paying this person overtime or not? And, it's very similar to the employee versus independent contractor. It is not black and white. It is kind of grayish. But the problem that you get into is that, if you got it wrong, having to go back and recalculate overtime, pay for people that should have been getting overtime, pretty gosh darn expensive and onerous. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that if someone is non-exempt, meaning like you have to pay them overtime, the other issue that you get into too is that that's not like a balanced weekly equation like all of us logical folk would think. It's a daily equation. So, you just got to be, it's one of those things where, when you're starting a new business, you don't really think about it, or you don't even know about it too much. And then you're operating, set company policy. And then all of a sudden you find out that you've got a problem, because the Department of Labor comes in and does an audit, or alternatively, it comes up in transaction diligence. I actually think, while it's more rare than the employee versus independent contractor challenge, it's actually a lot more expensive when it goes wrong. So I will stop talking about socialism now, other than to say also, we had a planning call with one of our clients. It's in the higher end recruiting business yesterday. And they just said, look, we're kind of a leading indicator of the economy. It's a good segue in recession. They're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown. Wall Street Journal had an article out that I've not read yet, but there is an article out, just reading by the subject line. It said, employers now rescinding offers to people. So that just, there's been a lot of talk. Can you think your way? Can you think or act your way into recession? The answer is probably, but businesses are starting to make moves, so that's why I feel like we got a timely topic today. So
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
I heard the same thing, just so you know, before we do that. What was it that I had just seen? Oh, Robert Half had the largest drop. I think it was today or yesterday, a 7% drop. It was the largest drop, which is a big staffing firm.
Yeah, wow.
It was, kind of interesting. So perfect timing. Do you want me to pull up this document, or do you want me to do it later?
No, if you go and
tell
pull
me.
up the document, now, and I'll kind of walk through the context. Jack, if you could chime in where you feel appropriate. Otherwise, since I'm going to be in Costa Rica next week, you hit the legal side of all this. So you can take a little break since you're going to be in the spotlight next week. And you kind of had to carry the heavy load up to this point on the transaction stuff. So there you go. It's my gift to you. There you go.
All right, I'm gonna go get a snack. I'll be back.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Take the dog for a quick walk. Just make sure you take your poop bags. Yeah. So what we came up with here is a checklist for, what's going to be funny is, like, if you've been listening for the last couple of weeks, a lot of the stuff that is on this list is the same stuff that Jack and I have been talking about in terms of getting yourself ready for an exit event. The only difference, honestly, it's not that there's even that much difference in terms of like the stuff that you should be doing on this list. It's just more like, unlike, I know I ought to be doing that, because eventually I need to exit my business, but I'm not exiting my business tomorrow. Thus do I really need to get started? I don't even know if I'm exiting in 5 years, and you guys keep on saying I'll be thinking 5 years out. So that's I can procrastinate. Well, I mean, it's kind of a bad idea to procrastinate this, in the sense that, it again, hitting the point that interest rates are up. The reason interest rates are up is to encourage Gary to stop buying stuff. We're a consumer-driven society. When Gary stops buying stuff, economy slows down. 2 quarters in a row. You were in a recession, folks. So that's kind of the point of, trying to get the business ready. It's not to scare anybody on the client base. Just, let's be responsible. So this checklist, which Gary will figure out how we're going to share. I'd also point out that if you're a BGW client, you've gotten a request to join the Vault, which is all of our intellectual property. We've also started a group chat over there to further dive into this topic, since it's going to be relevant for probably the next 6 months or so. But the way that I would approach recession proofing my business is in a very structured, logical manner that involves looking at my balance sheet and looking at my profit and loss statement for a couple key items. So I'm going to, kind of go into these and see how far we get, and then pick up next week. We don't get all the way through it. But the idea is, hey, let's just make sure the company's in a strong position in some sort of objective, quantifiable way. And if it's not, let's come up with some plans to get there. So, clearly the first item on the list, if not known already, establish a working capital target, then start saving 1 additional month. The whole point of that is that, like, if you hadn't already figured out, on the low side, how much working capital that you need to operate, working capital, we did that a couple webinars ago, but that's, basically cash plus inventory plus receivables minus payables and 1 year of your long-term debt payments. And, there's other stuff too, but that's the big items. If you haven't already figured how much of that you need to safely operate, by safely operate, it means that you don't have too much cash sitting around such that you're being a bozo and not reinvesting and exposing yourself to risk. But at the same time, you've got enough cash sitting around that you're butt isn't puckering every time a payroll comes up and a customer forgot to pay you. That's where, good working capital sits, somewhere in that range. It could be, one payroll up to, probably on the high side, 3 months overhead, or kind of good round numbers to sort of use. But if you haven't already figured out what that number is, now's the time to say, okay, I'm going to resolve in the next month, 2 months to figuring out what that number is. A good test is establish the number, operate the business. If you feel like your butt puckered, you went too low. If you feel like, my butt never puckered, maybe you're too high, and keep on dialing it down until your butt puckers. Then go back to the preceding time that your butt did not pucker and you got the right answer. Gary's the one on my camera. I see him cracking up. So he must be telling me, tone down the language. But once you figured out that number, don't do it overnight, because having to establish working capital minimums, can be draconian in terms of saving up some cash. But maybe set a goal that by the end of the year, maybe by first quarter next year, you'll have an additional, month or whatever factor of working capital, available to you. Now, some joker listening to this at some point is going to say, I got $1 million in the cash, I got a year's working capital, I'm totally fine. Well, let me tell you, the other lesson learned from the recession, why we keep on saying, keep a lean balance sheet, and I can appreciate this sometimes could sound contradictory, is that in the last recession that we experienced, we had a lot of clients that experienced death by 1,000 paper cuts because they had $1 million of cash sitting in the bank account. And thus when it's going, it's like Gil from, Glengarry Glen Ross. Oh, it's going to get better. The Simpsons, if you watch Simpsons, it's going to get better, bright and die, the days are going to be ahead. It's going to be out, but what? It was other than temporary, and they knew it was other than temporary, and they just did not want to admit that the reduction was other than temporary. So, it's not like I'm going to bed and putting my head on the pillow looking for people to lay off, but that's what needed to happen to be realistic. So, they might justify it and say, well, it's a humane thing to do it, but they burned through cash reserves until they got on life support, and then all of a sudden it was a massive scramble, fire drill, highly stressful. And I mean, what they ended up doing is blowing through millions in retained earnings that should have been cash that they had taken out of the business and reinvested and saved for a rainy day. And they did. Instead, they spent it all. So just don't make that mistake. That's why this is important, to establish the working capital target. It's so that you have enough, but at the same time, if you've got a lot, that you don't want to lull yourself into a false sense of, well, I don't have to make any decisions then if something bad happens, because I got plenty of money. You need to make decisions, and an easy way to make yourself make a decision is to say, I'm going to I always pick on Gary because he's got it, I can see on the screen. Even though I've got no work for Gary to do, I don't think I'm going to have any work for Gary to do for probably a year or 2 years. Gary's a great guy. I love him. But at the same time, if I keep Gary around, I could sink the whole ship. I'm just going to keep on paying him, versus, what should I do? Gary, here's a severance, we got a part company. It's for the greater good of the organization. Wish the best of luck. Hope we can part on good terms. And I've preserved the company for whole. Versus if you didn't have enough cash in the company and you had to pull that cash out of your own savings account, you might make the latter decision versus the former decision. So just that, harping on it, but that's why number one is really important. Number two is, looking at your AR, identifying problem collections and customers, and, kind of figure out, what am I doing with these people? So BGW has experienced this firsthand. I have a lot of experience with this problem. It's the, but they're good people, they always pay us, just a year late. Guess who's going to not get paid then? You, because you're already not getting paid on time. Therefore, the likelihood that year is going to stay a year is probably pretty low. Probably that year is going to turn into 2 years, if ever at all, because you're already getting stretched. You're just going to get stretched more. So, take a look at your AR and, start getting serious about collection issues, and, giving people a pass that are notoriously bad payers, because what are they going to do when, the poop hits the fan? You're going to get stretched. I would a lot rather get stretched from 15 days to 30 or 45 than to get stretched from a year to a year and 6 months.
Adam, I've seen, and we do this in our firm somewhat with, and we don't take a whole lot of things on contingency, but I know that because I'm on the finance committee, we monitor what we do as an extension of credit in the form of that, but also in ARs. Like every month we get a report of ARs over a certain dollar amount and ARs over a certain length of time, and then have to make certain decisions with respect to our credit managers. I look at every attorney who has billing responsibilities as a credit manager, and I'm constantly assessing their skills at being a good credit manager and whether I think the firm should allow them to make certain decisions with extension of credit. With respect to owners, to the extent that you can put together an algorithm, and I'm sure there's programs, I don't know if like QuickBooks or any of the other programs would do something like this, but we do it internally, which is we look at what is the percentage of AR in each of those buckets, 0 to 30, 31 to 60, 61 to 90, et cetera, as a percentage of total revenue or total ARs that are out there, in order to be able to manage that and decide whether or not we're going to extend credit in certain circumstances, meaning the amount of fees in advance or trust dollars, escrow, that we hold of a client's money in order to move forward on certain things. And so to kind of buffer the discussion of looking at ARs in your credit, you really should have a handle on that, because you're constantly extending credit when you are bringing on new customers and not getting money in advance. So if you can put together some sort of that, even if it's just a spreadsheet that you can export that shows you the snapshot of the numbers in order to make decisions, maybe not on every single one, but for the bigger deals that you have, that you're trying to decide how much money you should get from them, maybe at different periods of time at different benchmarks. So consider doing that if you are at a high credit risk of installment payments and those kind of things.
Yeah, that's right. And I think to echo your point, Jack, where it could get kind of nuanced and require some analysis is you've got the guy, big fish you just landed, and you got, first invoice creeping into the 90-day category, and then you've got all this current stuff. So as a percentage of total balance, the old stuff doesn't look so bad. That hides the fact that he's never paid you. So the likelihood that the good stuff is going to stay good because it got paid when he's already let one creep into the bad territory, pretty low. So to Jack's point, you kind of got to look at, hey, if they're bad, you got to assume the whole thing's probably going to be bad. Not just the bad piece. So just take a look. Gary, if you could highlight that I have a spelling error on the next bullet. So if you haven't done already, establishing inventory control policies, it's like, as the business owner, you can be over here saying, man, we got to get lean, start thinking about, slow down in demand. If you have a disconnect with the people buying stuff for you, it's highly likely they're thinking, oh man, we got to bulk up. Because there's, price may go up, maybe supply chain problems. We got to be here for our customers. It's like, oh, that's not good. So because all your cash is going to be tied up on it in inventory that you're not moving. So, if you kind of had as I know I ought to get around to, establishing par levels or establishing safety stock or, looking at, seasonal demand ordering, actually getting, demand forecasting in place and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you hadn't, if you've been procrastinating inventory controls, now is the time to look at inventory controls and inventory policies. And consider, look, even if I got a discount for buying in bulk, I may not be able to move it. Maybe I just accept a little bit more expense to make sure that I had the flexibility of retaining the cash, which really kind of hits to the next bullet point. One of our clients, I love what he said to me, which is, I like being able to give the bulldozer back if I need to give the bulldozer back. Even though it's more expensive to do operating leases than it is to just purchase equipment outright. If you don't do any of it, at least consider doing some of it so that you can put it back if you need to. Or, if you're already doing it, maybe you increase the volume that you're doing in terms of leases for equipment purchases where you can give the stuff back pretty easily without a penalty versus, hey, I'm going to buy the stuff and then all of a sudden I've got a whole bunch of idle stuff that I could move, but I would be moving it in a severe money losing scenario, and I've got debt on the books for it, so maybe I can't even move it at the price that it would move for. Or, it's just sitting idle. I don't have any debt on it because I bought it for cash, but I'm not going to sell it because I paid so much for it. I'm just watching my cash balance dip and dip and dip and dip and dip and dip and dip. So just, consider using operating leases for your future equipment purchases instead of getting everything tied up in actual purchases secured by, an equipment line of credit, or whatever you have. Next one, but for your CPA and your attorney, but for if you are the CPA firm and your attorney is also on a webinar with you, we inadvertently stressed Jack once, so we got one of those nasty emails from him. Look at which vendors can be delayed in payment without adversely impacting services. And if you need to just let people know, hey, I know we've normally been a good payer, I'm going to need an extra 30 days just to grease the skids a little bit, you should consider doing that. But what I've typically found is that sometimes CEOs, but definitely finance people, love paying bills on time or before they're actually due. And a lot of times vendors, when they send you a bill, don't actually, like our invoices are due upon demand. I mean, in other words, like there is no term because due upon demand or due upon receipt, so me to say, oh God, it's due upon receipt, that I don't expect to get paid upon receipt. I expect to get paid within 30 days. The reason that I say due upon receipt is because I know that the person entering it into the program will enter the date received and likely pay it 30 days later. If I say due upon 30 days of receipt, they will enter in the date that it's due as the received date and then pay me 30 days after that. So, that's our little game that we play. Clients keep paying us, that'd be great. But, make sure you got terms nailed down with each one of your vendors, and just again look at who you can delay if you need to delay things. I mean, again, Jack was talking about landlords. It's like most leases, yeah, they're doing the first, day of the month or whatever, but you usually have a 10 to 15 day grace period, no penalty. That's some cash, that's available to you with no penalty. Sometimes the penalty is de minimis, might be worth paying it if you had to, if it's that or payroll, if it comes down to it. So at least knowing what that is ahead of time is going to be real helpful.
And if I could add free legal advice when you're reviewing contracts, which you should send to your lawyer anyway, but a lot of times you'll see in leases and other documents that there is a difference between a monetary default and a non-monetary default. And if you read very carefully, the grace period, so if they say, hey, there's a problem, there's a breach, you may get 30 days to fix it. And you may get 30 days upon, usually 30 days upon notification. Sometimes it's 30 days upon sending the notice. Sometimes it's 30 days upon receipt of the notice. So depending on the perspective, but many times there is no cure period for monetary default. It is due when it's due. Now, I would say that is more for consistent payments like rent, like payment on a loan that you know the amount. And when I'm on the borrower side or the debtor side representing them, then I push for that to have at least maybe not 30 days, but 5 days, maybe 10 days that it from the due date, not from notice, because I don't think it's fair that when it's due and we have to tell you that you missed a payment. So I'm more preventing an issue of default if it's over a holiday or there's a banking issue or something happened. When I'm on the lender side of things, I'm a little more harsh. I'm like, okay, there's this thing called bill pay. There's this thing called auto pay. I mean, whatever banks want to call it, that you can set that up. So there should be no issue other than maybe a banking holiday. And, we wouldn't get in very far with the judge or jury that you missed a payment because the bank was actually closed on holiday and that was the due date. So keep in mind those things, that they're, on the one hand, you do want to have a little bit of grace period, but on the other hand, with technology and automation, those things shouldn't be a problem. The middle ground, the gray area, are the variable payments that you can't just set up for automatic payment on the 5th of every month because the number differs. My solution to that, again, when I'm on the lender side, is, well, there's this thing called Outlook that has calendars, that has reminders that you can put back. So then it can pop up when you come into the office that day that, oh, I have a bill to pay in 5 days. So, I see it both ways. So it really just depends on who is my client in that moment. But, usually reasonable middle ground is to, use the technology, because that's really expected these days.
Cool. Next bullet, try to firm up increases in credit cards and lines of credit. I think our advice has always been, hey, try to get the most that you can possibly get in these areas, as long as you don't use it like a candy jar to run your company. But it doesn't hurt to do a preemptive, hey, let's look for an increase in our credit limits, just so that there's some availability, sitting out there. If you've got a renewal coming up, start the conversation around, hey, I'd like to get an increase, or, if I already got one out there, and right now, in terms of increases, banks are doing them, as long as you kind of show that, hey, I made it through the recession, we can carve off those bad years. And now I'm, either I'm pre-recession plus, that's going to be increase worthy versus a bad story to tell. So if you got a pretty good story to tell, then, try to make a preemptive move here in terms of increasing credit card limits and increasing lines of credit.
You're more likely to get it when you don't need it than when you need it.
Yeah, that's right. So. Yeah. Payroll's due tomorrow. My line of credit's maxed. I'm screwed. Company's going down in flames if you don't help me. That's not the request to give to your banker. The request to give the banker is, hey, we're just trying to be responsible. Things looking great. We're getting prepared. We're increasing our working capital, gone through this, and this. We just want to be on the safe side, and appreciate how you've always been there for us. That's the way to do the request.
Hey, can I jump in on that?
Yep.
Communication, and you talked about it a little bit, but relationships matter in business. They always do. And communication is one of the top things that every business deals with and doesn't do a great job of, but especially when things are tough or before they get tough, it's important to be communicating pretty regularly and freely if you got issues. When things were really, really tough, I did a TGIF a few weeks ago about Roger Braswell. We had an investment with this company, Compact Power, and this is in 08, 09, but in 09, things were really, really, really bad. He didn't know if he was going to be able to hold it together. Fortunately, he weathered that storm, sold his company to Home Depot, and is all wonderful. But during that period of time, he called me regularly. I was the last guy standing in the private equity firm, and that was one of our last pieces of anything that had value. And he never had any good news during those calls, but he still had the calls. And there's something to be said about kind of bucking up and having communication, even when it's difficult. You remember those things, especially when they're good times too. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks, Gary.
relatedly too, is that, we saw this happen in front of our eyes only just a few months ago. So it seems like only a few months ago during the whole PPP application process, where those who had relationships with their bankers and could call them up and say, hey, I have this problem, versus the ones that were scrambling, and understandably scrambling, because these days, do you really need to have a relationship with a banker whenever you can do everything electronically? But we saw the value of personal interactions and personal relationships, professional business, personal relationships. And so, yes, a word of encouragement to go ahead and make those relationships, because not only for that is bankers tend to be, and if there are any bankers on the line, I apologize, but I mean, it's kind of a true fact, somewhat nomadic. I mean, it's, to get up the corporate ladder, you see a lot of people who are going from place to place. So it may be that that banker is with a different bank that may be able to have a better relationship, banking relationship, and better programs and processes and things for you as a business as it grows. So again, just the value of having those personal relationships in a time where you really may not think you really need them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's a couple bullets down. So we'll go ahead and just make sure we cross that one off. Evaluate banking relationship. Is it strong? Do you really know your commercial lending team, and do they know you? I mean, if you did not learn this lesson, as Jack just pointed out, in PPP, shame on you. That. So do not. I think most folks know that I'm a huge Star Trek fan. In one of my favorite Star Trek episodes, Scotty says, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." So, make sure that if you got burned in PPP, or you felt a little iffy in PPP, now's the time to not make that mistake again. So, but getting back to where we're at, I did not bring Chew to the office, Gary. Thank you for that, because I have a lunch meeting and the restaurant would not allow Chew to go out for lunch. But if you've got evergreen capital, meaning line of credit debt that isn't really going down, so it really was money that you use to kind of permanently fund the business. I've got $1 million line of credit. I've had this $500,000, $600,000 balance, been sitting there forever. Look at terming it out, just so that you free up some line of credit availability. Again, the time to be requesting this is when you're looking strong. Just say, hey, look, I want to get you paid back, really treat this a true line of credit. What can you do for me in terms of getting this termed out so we can go and get it paid back and all that kind of stuff. So, look at that, as a possibility. And then that's all. If you think about it, these 4 points here, including the one I'm about to go into, are all just related to banking relationship. We can't say that hard enough. I mean, that's going to be your buddy, in terms of, making sure that relationship's healthy, because that's the person that, if the poop hits the fan, is going to need to go to bat for you. So you just want to make sure that relationship is pretty solid. So, consider lengthening your existing long-term debt. So in other words, like if you got a big balance that's due to be paid off in 2 years, and you could refinance the whole thing to 5 years, something to consider that would free up cash flow. Or alternatively, if you did your working capital calculation, you got a boatload full of cash, especially with interest rates going up, if you got a floating rate, I mean, consider just paying it off so that you don't have the debt obligation hanging out in your neck. Because when you've got to make, it's if you think about the US as an example, there's one thing the US cannot cut from our budget: how much we're paying in debt. So your only variables then are non-debt spending. Well, what's that? Defense spending. Nobody wants to cut that. Social Security and entitlements. People would say, grr, free money. It's not freaking free money. What do you think that Social Security line item is in your tax? It's close to revenue neutral. Government takes in, government pays out. So you can't really cut entitlements because we're paying taxes to fund those entitlements. So if you're going to cut the entitlement, you got to cut the tax too. So then you're left with discretionary spending, which is really just a small portion of the federal government's budget. So your company could be the same thing. If you look at profit generated by your company and how much of it is going to pay down your debt, one of those ratios that we talked about in the past called the debt coverage ratio. That's how much profit that I'm generating relative to 1 year's worth of debt service payments. Meaning, is all of my profit going to pay debt? Is 75% of my profit going to pay debt? What you're looking to do is to get that ratio down, by either refinancing or paying off, so that less of your profit is paying long-term debt. And there's only 2 levers to pull: extend the debt or pay it off. That's it. That's all you got in terms of levers to pull. So you're just trying to reduce the amount of profit you got to generate to pay it by pulling those levers. And we already hit on the bank relationship, so I'm not going to hit that again. I think probably a good stopping point, Gary, would be to hit this last point, then we'll hit the profit and loss in a future meeting. But in terms of stress testing your balance sheet, it's like these last bullet points, they're all well and good, and you should do them, absolutely. But once you're set, what you're really looking for is, all right, well, how bad could it get? And I would still be set. Meaning like, okay, I ran through my ratios, did my working capital calculation, looked at my debt to equity. I've got a good debt to equity, which is, how much the company do I own versus how much the bank own or other people own. Typical ratio would be 3 to 1. Depending on industry, sometimes we're looking for lower. Some industries can go higher. FY during the banking crisis, I want to say that Lehman Brothers debt to equity ratio was like 90 to 1. So they could afford no mistakes. But it's basically, the lower this ratio is, the more room for error that you have. Meaning like you can sustain problems better because you have less of your profit has to be generated. With profit becomes part of equity until it's distributed into your pocket. You have less of your profit that has to go to generate to pay your debt. The lower this ratio typically is. So what you're trying to do is just stress test it, because if you run through all these working capital ratios and you're looking good from a debt to equity perspective, but it's because you have a ton of fixed assets and a ton of inventory that's all been paid for, that's not going to serve you well if the poop hits the fan and your sales start to slow down and you still got to make payroll. Because what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to fire sell inventory, fire sell fixed assets. So the point in saying that is that, okay, thanks, Boatsman, I'm looking pretty good here. Ratios are looking pretty good. If you just said, okay, if I took half the half the liquid stuff away, what does it look like? It kind of tells you all right, I need to work a little bit more on liquidity, even if it means I've got a little bit lower debt to equity ratio because I'm going to retain a little bit more cash in the company than I have been in the past. Or, make some short-term profit-making moves just to build up some cash reserves. Maybe go ahead and do fire sell off some inventory, sell off some old fixed assets that, hey, might even be below market, but they're not doing me any good. Basically you're just trying to see how much of the storm you could weather based on having liquid assets is part of this measure versus illiquid assets being part of the measure.
Good stuff. So if anybody joined us late and said, wait, where's that document? Well, guess what? We're going to, I just texted Rachel, we're going to put it in the vault. And if you are listening and you are not a BGW client yet, if you don't have access to the vault, you can email me and I'll make sure that we get a kind of a one-time pass or something like that so that you can get it. But this is available to you, and that if you are a BGW client, or even if you're on our mailing list, you'll get an access to the vault to be able to see it. And it's kind of a short-term pass or whatever. But Rachel, I think, is going to be sending that out later today. So, and anybody that came on late and wants to review this stuff, it will be up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel later on this afternoon. It's been kind of a quiet day out there. I know it's hot, and it was really hot yesterday. I think rain's coming, which would be great. Any questions out there before we wrap it up? Any thoughts? I'm really bummed though that you didn't bring Chewie, because when you said you're Star Wars fan, that little pug is cute, man.
And she's still cute.
Your wife posted a picture with you wearing kind of like a baby holder, only it's Chewy.
I know.
It's hilarious. And I'm like, good job, Adam.
I get more comments when I walk into Lowe's with that dog strapped to my front than like people with babies. And I'm doing it primarily to give the family a break, just like I did with the kids when I took them places, like, because that dog is crazy.
Yeah, I got to see it
but she loves being in a baby carrier facing forward. It's like, that's right. I'm in charge around here. So.
You have a stroller for the dog too? Do you go on walks with it?
I have not got, that is a bridge too far, Jack. A bridge too far.
He said he's a libertarian, not a libertarian.
Yeah, I've already had my manhood questioned enough about having the freaking forward-facing carrier. Like, the stroller is, I can carry the damn 6-pound dog on my chest, all right? I don't need a stroller to carry the damn dog.
It's hot. You don't want the dog's paws to get burned up. It's okay. We understand.
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
We're not judging, mostly.
Right. Much. Yeah. So I was at Lowe's the other day, and this guy's like walking his, German Shepherd, muscular on kind of a tatted leash, younger guy, tatted up, wearing a tank top, wife tatted up, walking next to him. And I passed and I looked over at him. I actually said, y'all need to get yourself a manly dog, as I'm wearing, they just started cracking up.
Well, I guess it's better than saying toodles.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh man. All right. Last call. Any questions out there? You might as well hit Adam right now, because he's going to be in Costa Rica. Be careful of the surf out there. The undertow is amazing in Costa Rica.
Got it.
So I'm not kidding, man. So anyway, but it's beautiful. I have not seen it other than Zoom when my son was living in Costa Rica for a semester, and I got to see whatever
There you go.
his camera showed me, but that was it. So have fun. All right. Well,
Cool.
everybody, thank you for joining us. Adam, have a safe and wonderful break with your family. Much needed. Jack, I'll see you next week. It may be just you and me. If Matt Anderson can hop in and join us, that'd be awesome too. We'll see. Still waiting for him to dig back out from him being on vacation. So
I might be able
Anyway.
to find a ringer for us on our side too to join
well,
in.
there
We'll
you
see.
go.
There you go.
That'd be awesome. And we can finish the checklist if you want to do it next week. We'll just kind of play that by ear. But this whole theme on recession proofing your business, timely. And there are things that we can do while we see potential storm clouds on the horizon, and hopefully they don't amount to anything, but in case they do, coming up from Kansas and Oklahoma, like Adam and myself, we're used to those thunderstorms,
Right.
and some of them became whoppers.
That's right.
Hopefully this won't be one, but let's be prepared either way. So, all right, guys, have a wonderful day. Enjoy, and we'll see you next week, Lord willing.
Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.